What's going on, everybody? Special guest here. It's Matt Brown, publisher of Extra Points. We're going to talk about NCAA football, the video game, get into that. I know a lot of people are excited about it coming out next year. Matt, we're going to get into some details about what you're reporting on it. You've done a great job of that. But first off, just is it going to come out essentially? I think people hear about the boycott. It was delayed a year. Just can you touch on that part before we get into some details about the game, that their plan, their vision?
Yeah, let me hop into this right up front, right? Because I think that there's been a little bit of sensationalization happening on social media, or people maybe not reading through everything. I have no reason to believe that anything that has happened over the last 2 weeks, whether the Brandar lawsuit or frustration from some athlete advocates or the CFBPA proposed boycott, I have no reason to think any of those have anything to do with the current projected release date, which is the summer of 2024. I've had people at EA tell me this. I've had schools and their licensing departments that send stuff to CLC and EA tell me this. And you're looking at the original project proposal that CLC, which is the Collegiate Licensing Corporation, sent out to all these schools back in 2021. It laid out a very explicit framework for how we can make this game in the unlikely event we are not able to come to terms for NIL rights and agreements with athletes. We can still make this game without athlete IP. The only thing that can realistically hold up the release date of this game beyond technical issues on EA side is if schools decide to pull back their IP based on frustration with the proposed deal, based on potential litigation, based on some other factors. That could change things. EA could launch this game without any players. They're not going to launch this game without 12 schools. But there's no evidence to suggest that that's likely or that the germ of that is happening in any way. So you may see an attorney or two speculate if 9 different things happen that the release date could change. Let me just try to calm your fears.
Yeah,
this is not going to hold things up.
Yeah, that's great. And I also I want to get into that, obviously, but let's stick with the fun stuff first. Dynasty Mode. I think that's a big thing. Everybody remembers it from before. Again, the last game that came out was the 14 version. It came out in 2013. Yeah. The Dynasty Mode, maybe expectations or maybe what you're hearing about that. Maybe what can fans expect, players of the game to expect with the Dynasty Mode, because that obviously was a huge hit before.
Sure. I mean, that was arguably the flagship mode of the game over the 2011, 12, 13, 14 editions. I can tell you that the development team is cautious about talking really about specifics. And part of that is because, not all of it's completely nailed down. What I can share is that multiple developers have told me, several conversations we've had, that the current squad, EA, believes that Dynasty Mode is the most important part of the game heading into this year, that they are completely rebuilding the typical week-to-week flow of Dynasty Mode from 2014 with an increased emphasis on making recruiting more realistic. That the NIL is a part of this game. The transfer portal is a part of this game. And they have reached out to not just college coaches who they've routinely used for consultants, but a couple of longtime journalists who cover college athletics, to have them sign NDAs and sit down and say, we want to make sure that how we're depicting this is not just fun, but very accurate to what recruiting actually looks like. The very specific thing that a developer shared with me the last time we talked to them was, when it comes to recruiting in Dynasty Mode, we want to make sure that the player is excited about the recruits they sign in week 6 to play with them next year, and that there is a week-to-week excitement and connection with the players rather than just a name as you're going through your season. What that means in practice, we're going to find out more about that over the next 12 months, I think. But I know that EA, and justifiably, does not really get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to not making games all about microtransactions, and the last couple of flagship EA releases haven't gone very well. So I can't promise the game is good. All I can promise is, based on what they're telling me and what the schools are telling me, they care very deeply about realism, particularly as it pertains to Dynasty Mode.
Yeah, you touched on the microtransactions. Certainly, sports video games in general have changed over the last 10 years since this last game came out, whether it's going more towards that road to glory mode, the my player type modes, or even the ultimate team type things. And that's why I think if fans that remember the game, for me personally, of course, I played it. I have every game still to this date, every year it came out. Just the Dynasty Mode, again, that was so popular for a lot of people. And another thing, Matt, that I think was popular. I think people have asked about the team builder, essentially the customized teams that they're able to do with team builder. Any sense on that? And that's another mode that was so popular before with the game.
It was, and to be honest, I don't know. That's one of the questions I get asked the most. I've asked it right now. I know part of the complication with team builder and with some level of roster customization is that with the internet, if you put team builder out there, every FCS school, every Division II school, everybody they couldn't get rights to is going to be, all that stuff's going to be on the internet in 4 days. And that's kind of how it was in the very beginning of 2014 too. And that may not be an issue if there's no plans of ever including some of that IP. But the people at EA have told me, hey, we're not going to have FCS teams in the beginning, but we'd like to have them in later. We're trying to figure out the best way to pay it. Pay the schools, pay the players, incorporate that potentially as DLC. You're not going to incorporate something as DLC if you're also going to give players an opportunity to go on Operation Sports and get all that same stuff for free and undermine your ability to make money. So I say that not to say that I'm not saying that there's not going to be team builder because I don't know that. I don't want to speculate on it. I'm just saying that that calculus becomes a little bit more complicated based on how EA is looking to make money beyond just the sale of the game.
Now, when I think back on this game again, my experience of this game, with it not being out there for over 10 years now, there's a lot of people that didn't grow up either essentially playing it when it came out, the excitement of it and everything like that. Matt, anything that stands out to you with your own personal experience, maybe the excitement or fans that don't really remember it, or maybe the excitement that this game can bring, even if they are a sports fan, whether it be a Madden with the EA series, but this is a little bit different. I think back then it was certainly a different game, even if maybe the way that the players move, maybe there were some similarities, but the excitement for this and maybe what kind of impact you can think it'll have either on the video game industry, sports fans in general, college football fans all around the country.
Yeah, the industry component here is very interesting. And one thing I would encourage fans to remember here is that this game isn't NCAA football 24. It's EA Sports College Football. Part of the reason this entire thing was delayed is because EA recognizes you only get one chance to make a first impression. And this is a new name. It's the last game wasn't just a decade ago. It was two console generations ago. All of the audio has to be new. The software architecture has to be new. There's nothing that was in the last game code-wise, like literally nothing, I'm told, that can be used for this one. You have to build the whole freaking thing from scratch, which means that it's a new thing. So just because it was the exact same way in 2012, 2013, 2024, or in 12, 13, 14, doesn't necessarily mean it has to be this way now. They want to create a new enterprise. I have heard from so many schools over the past couple of years that they cherished being a part of this game, not because they made a whole lot of money from it. EA historically, and this is true for the proposal for this year, doesn't pay schools a ton of money in licensing fees, especially because there's 130 plus of them. The schools, split a 10% sales pool, and it's not divided equally. And a lot of these schools are only making $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 from being in the game. And it takes a little bit of work to get all the stuff in there. But they recognized how important it was from a marketing perspective, from a branding perspective, and for making people outside of their home markets aware of their school. Like my experience, right? I'm 36, and I played these games a lot in high school and college. I don't think this is super unique. Like I remember as a kid growing up in Ohio, who looks like me, in part of the country where there weren't a whole lot of HBCUs, I became aware of a lot of those schools through the video game, through playing Florida A&M, through playing Morgan State. Because growing up in Bumblefart, Ohio, I'm not going to know anybody who went to Morgan State. I didn't know anybody that went to a lot of these schools out west. So you get to see what Oregon Stadium looks like. You get to see the Rockies. You hear the fight song. And then when you're a high schooler and they send you mail, I didn't go to Oregon. I stayed at home, but I, knew more about those schools and their traditions and what made them what they were when it was time for me to consider where to go. And that is critically important. If you're a place that isn't a gigantic, enormous brand, if you're Coastal Carolina, you want the world and every college football hipster on Twitch to play your school with the goofy ass teal uniforms and the weird chicken mascot, because that's going to enhance the marketability and reach of your school and help reach people who are going to give you money someday. They're desperate for that, especially in an era where every single school is desperate to reach younger people who are not buying tickets to games at the same level. This is a very important product as athletic departments and schools and broadcast media are trying to help generate this new rising generation into people that care about sports in a way that millennials and older Americans don't or already do.
Yeah, you touched on the excitement and also just, yeah, you said learning, and think about the rivalry games. Maybe if you didn't grow up in that part of the country, you find out about the Apple Cup or certain awards and trophies that are awarded in rivalry games. You just learn so much more about it. And like you said, you see more about it. And also people that play Dynasty Mode, you got to pick a school, and it's not necessarily your favorite school. Maybe you pick the random school, maybe a different part of the country, as you mentioned. I know that's exciting too. Matt, what's going on a lot with the player, the NIL stuff. Obviously, that's essentially kind of what stopped the game back then. Where it's at now, can you kind of just give an update of essentially what's going on, maybe what's proposed to the players? And I've heard you describe it, and I think you do a great job of it. But maybe kind of just lay it out for fans that haven't heard or where they're at right now with the NIL and the involvement of the game.
Yeah, I recognize this can get in the weeds a little bit. So everyone, I would encourage you to stick with me, and I'll try to explain this as clearly as I can. A couple weeks ago, EA announces that they partnered with a company called One Team Partners, a group licensing firm, to help facilitate contracts to all of the players in college football. What EA wants to do is pay for the license, the NIL license, for every scholarship athlete in FBS to be in the game. There's 11,000 plus of those. 85 kids per roster. 133 teams in college football. That's a little bit over 11,000. And so One Team Partners, their role is to reach out to every single one of those players and share with them a group license. The way that group licensing works is that everybody in the group license is paid the same amount of money. And that's exactly how every other sports video game works. Like Tom Brady, if he wasn't on the cover of the game, made the same amount of money from Madden as his backup long snapper. And the reason those are set up that way is because EA recognizes we don't have the time or the capacity to negotiate 11,000 different contracts. And the value of the backup left tackle at Western Michigan and the starting tight end at Utah State and the backup safety at USC, it's impossible to decipher the differences. So we're going to give everybody the exact same deal. That deal has not been finalized. It has not been sent to the players. Some of the companies that were involved in the bidding for that have leaked to reporters like me, also to Sportico and to a couple other places, that the proposed framework is to pay everybody $500. That's it, flat fee. Now, you might listen to that and think, sounds pretty good for not having to do anything. They don't have to fly to Florida for facial scans. They just have to check a box. But it is dramatically less than what athletes make for every other professional football game. And furthermore, they are not entitled to any royalties, which is what happens for everybody else. There are two major groups right now that are opposing this deal. One of them is called the College Football Players Association, or CFBPA. It's not a players union. College football doesn't have a players union because they're not employees. This is an advocacy group, and it's a very small one. It's a group that only, I want to say, has less than 100 active college football players in it. It has more who are retired, who played in the NFL or done with their eligibility. They're calling on everybody to boycott the deal because they're saying athletes were not involved in this deal. For Madden, the NFLPA negotiates the group license. For the NBA Players Union negotiates the license. Players had nothing to do with any of this. Someone just said, here's the deal. And the CFBPA is saying that's not right. You also have a company that you may have heard of in the news called Brandar. The Brandar Group is another group licensing company. It's similar to One Team Partners. They have deals with athletes at 57 FBS institutions, including gigantic brands like Ohio State, Michigan, and Florida, to represent those athletes in group licensing deals. So if you go to the bookstore in Columbus, where I grew up, you buy a jersey with Ohio State jersey with the player's name on it, it was Brandar that negotiated and set up that joint deal with the school and Fanatics or whoever made the jersey. They give a cut to the player. Brandar is saying, listen, you can't cut us out of this deal because we signed these contracts to exclusively represent the players at these schools. We need to be a part of these negotiations, and we wouldn't have agreed to a $500 deal. And we represent so many athletes that we'd be able to have the leverage to push for something more. That's going to court. And sometimes the court you win, sometimes the court you lose. What is most likely here is a settlement. I think it's important for fans to realize neither of these groups are represented by the current players are not saying we're holding out unless you pay us $500 more or $1,000 more and you give us X, Y, or Z. You have a lawsuit from another corporation that was fighting over who gets the right to negotiate the deal, and you have an advocacy group that has very few players in it. Those arguments and perhaps other ones could shape what the deal fundamentally looks like. It shows how negotiating in college is very hard, but they're not going to change the release date of the game. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And there's so many details. Again, essentially, I think you're doing a great job of breaking it down because I think people do hear some of it, part of it. And I think you're doing a good job of explaining it. And like you said, it's not necessarily $500 individually. There's so many players, I think over 10,000, that just adds up. And whether how big the numbers begin. And Matt, one of the things I heard you also mention is players leave the game essentially after a 4-year run. And that's a big difference between Madden, obviously, as well.
Yeah. I don't think it's fair to say Madden athletes get $15,000, therefore college athletes should get that many. And what is fair fundamentally is whatever can be negotiated, right? And I actually agree with some of these complaints here that athletes should have been involved in that conversation. I don't think I could just pick a number out of a hat, or anybody can, and say if that's fair. There has to be a give and take, and the athletes as a group were not involved in that. But yes, there's 2,500 people in the NFLPA. There's going to be 11,000 in this game, so obviously it's not going to be the same. College football video games are very popular. They're not nearly as popular as Madden. Which by the way, sells copies worldwide, and it's a much more popular sport than college athletics. We're dealing with a smaller sales pool, and you're also right. When you play Madden, I play NBA 2K a lot. When you play most of these other games, you're playing a Dynasty Mode. You're playing with current athletes for most of your playing experience. I have to play a Madden Dynasty for a hell of a long time before Patrick Mahomes retires. He's got a decade of football left in him. But if I'm playing, if I got my office TV set up over here, if I fire up a college football dynasty after 3 hours of play at the end of my first season, 25% of the guys are gone. They're going to be replaced by computer players. Anybody that plays the game for more than 3 days is going to be facing entirely computer players. And so that value of an individual athlete is dramatically lower than it is in a professional sports world, especially because even outside the most hardcore consumers of college athletics, and that's not the main player base of this game, they're not going to know that many people. Like, if right now, somebody who cares very deeply about college sports, like how many defined starters for the 2024 Clemson football team can you name right now? You have to run and let me grab my Phil Steele. Like, let me go try to get it right. Like it's hard to do, even if it's for a program outside of your own conference, right? Who named the starting 22 for Texas? Most people probably can't do that. More of them could do it for the NFL. So it would make sense for the college athlete rights to be lower. It's not about the money so much as it is about the principle and the privilege for negotiating the deal.
And even to add to that point, absolutely you're correct about knowing other teams, but even I think people on their own team, their favorite team. I have a friend that always does a running joke that, he'll see someone on the street and ask, hey, is that so-and-so, just joking, because he has no clue. Sometimes even fans don't even know their own players, what they look like. And they come and go, essentially even a good run is a 2-year starter at their own school. So obviously diehard fans know about the guys coming in through the recruiting process. I'm going to wrap this up. Matt, you've been excellent. One thing I forgot to mention, I know people do ask about it, kind of going backtrack a little bit, but online Dynasty, another popular mode. I know for video game fans, people like the Dynasty mode to be able to play online with friends. Any sense on that? Anything you can report on with that mode?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't come up in conversations. I would be very surprised if it wasn't a factor at all, given that it was in the older games and how critical Dynasty is to next year's release, and how online play in general is much more important than it was in the last video game system. So my assumption would be yes, but I can't confirm or report that. And generally speaking, very specific game modes don't come up in open records requests. They don't come up when talking with licensing professionals or ADs. So those are harder things for me to confirm. I can tell you all kinds of stuff about assets that schools submit, about the realism that's going to be depicted in the game itself. But about game modes, that's a harder thing for me to do.
Sure. Before we wrap this up, Athletic Director Simulator 3000, tell us about that.
Yeah.
And again, everybody else, check out Matt's work. All that, as you mentioned, I know you could go even more in depth on this, so definitely follow Matt at Extra Points and Twitter. But Athletic Director Simulator 3000, tell us about it.
Sure. So my day job, right? I write the Extra Points newsletter. It's owned by a company called D1 Ticker. And what we do on a daily basis is write newsletters, original reporting about the off the field stuff that shapes college athletics. So sure, I write a lot about this video game, but I write a lot about sponsorship revenue in general. I write about conference realignment, about conference finances, about television deals, all that back end stuff. And a lot of our work is used in college classrooms, people who are studying sports management or sports business. They use our newsletters as textbooks. We walk them through how to move these theoretical things into practice. So we're not computer programmers. I have a political science degree, but it started off as a joke and then became progressively not a joke. We built a real computer game, and it's called Athletic Director Simulator 3000. It looks a lot like the Oregon Trail. You got the green and black graphics, 8-bit audio of fight songs, and it's meant to very realistically simulate the experience of running a Division I athletic department. The player starts at a low major. Take a school like North Florida, somebody in the NECs, maybe somebody in like the WAC, and you face a variety of scenarios that real universities face. And you have to manage your budget, manage your support, and manage your wins and losses to your department. If you do well, you get a chance to get promoted to maybe UAB, a G5 kind of school, and then maybe a power conference school, and you do poorly, you get fired. If you subscribe to Extra Points, which is how we make almost all of our money, you can play a beta version of the game right now. I imagine the game is going to be behind a paywall for the next few months, but it's almost finished. We're by the time you listen to this, our final code deploy might drop. So if that's a game you might be interested in playing, it works on mobile, it works on any browser, PC or Mac, you can find it at extrapointsmb.com.
That's awesome. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Tons. Like I said, follow him. Definitely appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.